Okay, good morning, guys. We're going to just start with a short video to introduce the workshop, and then we'll pass it on to Alan.
My name is Deandra, and I'm a Youth Reach Counselor with JVS Toronto, and I work with youth who have been in conflict with the law or at risk of being in conflict with the law. The first thing that we would encourage youth to do is to Google themselves. A youth that has been in conflict with the law may have been in a part of a high-profile case. There may have been news reports on the incident that happened, that occurred in the past, and so there may be some negative media around that person. If there are things that exist online that create a negative image around them, and it's the first few hits when you Google their name, what we do is we have them recreate their image to reflect who they are now, and we do this by creating social media pages. With regards to addressing a gap on your resume or on a youth's resume, gaps that are a year and under a year do not necessarily raise a flag because employers recognize that it takes a while to find a job. Now, if you're working with a youth who has more than a year missing because whether they were incarcerated or they just weren't working, they were away from the labor force, there are a couple ways that you can strategically address this question if asked in an interview. The idea is to focus on what they did actively and not so much what they did not do. So in that period of time when the youth wasn't working, were they taking care of family? Were they traveling? Were they volunteering? Were they learning a skill? Anything other than the fact that they weren't working is something that they can focus on, talk about it, talk about what they've learned during that time, and then move on from the point.
I think one of the first things is understanding what their record is. If you have that relationship, it's very good to just communicate with them and find out, okay, what is their record? And then from there, you can find out kind of what limitations they have. One of the other good things is to get them to do a police background check. They might think they have this like real serious record, so on and so on, but really when the police background check comes back, they really have something very, very minor that won't stop them from going to any employment, any work employment. So that's where I would start with them. And then from there, it's about creating connections with employers who are going to hire with a criminal record. So we look into construction companies, there's some marketing firms, there's tons of things out there that these youth can work at. And they think that those possibilities aren't there, that their only possibility is like factory work or construction work. And that's really not the case. So it's about creating relationships with employers and being upfront with them about what the record that the youth has and seeing if that's a possibility. If it is a possibility, then you guys can go through that avenue. One of the worst things to do is to send a youth to apply for a job and they get through the whole process and then they do their police background check and then they find out that something pops up and then they can't work at that establishment. Right then and there, it just deters them. I'm not saying it's going to bring them into their past life if that's what they were into, but it'll definitely deter them from applying for jobs and going through that process. So try to work that out before you get to that piece.
My name is Alan DePass. I'm a pre-employment facilitator with the John Howard Society of Toronto, where I work with men who have been in some sort of conflict with the criminal justice system and are looking for assistance getting back into employment. There are 3 types of background checks that an employer can conduct on an applicant. The first is a criminal record check. Under a criminal record check, an employer can see convictions that have not been subject to a pardon, except in the case that it was a summary conviction and it has been more than 5 years since the offense, the employer can no longer see this information. The next level of record check is called a police record and judicial matters check. This shows everything on the first level of check. It also shows any other findings of guilt. So an absolute discharge, a conditional discharge, or a suspended sentence. And the third type of check, which is not quite as common as the other two, is called a vulnerable sector screening and is only done in the event that the person applying for the position is going to be working with a vulnerable population, such as children and adults. As outlined by the Occupational Health and Safety Act, employers are not required to do a criminal background check on their employees except in specific circumstances. But an employer does have the right to request a criminal background check. In the event that an employer requests a criminal background check as a condition of hiring, consent must be given by the applicant. An employer is not allowed to just do a background check without consent. Once the criminal background check is done, depending on the type of check, it depends on where that record will go. So for a police record check, the check should go back to the applicant and the applicant will submit that record to the employer. However, the applicant is allowed to sign consent for their record to be sent directly to the employer for review. When it comes to a vulnerable sector screening, that check has to go back to the applicant and the applicant must submit that in person to the employer. The employer is not allowed to receive that check directly.
Thank you very much for staying tuned to our video. We will be posting this on the City of Toronto website shortly. We do have a few more edits. It's hot off the press. So you're our first audience. Feel free to give us your feedback. And thank you for joining us at our first Toronto Youth Equity Strategy and Youth Employment Partnerships workshop of the year. This is a series of training for frontline workers who are working with youth most vulnerable to involvement in violence and crime. We do have two upcoming workshops on June 5th and 7th on the art of facilitation and youth mental health. Our youth mental health workshop, I think they're both actually at capacity, so hopefully you have all already registered, but we will be hopefully running a second version of the youth mental health workshop where there has been a lot of demand, and we keep that one a bit small so that there can be some interactive and intensive kind of learning. And we will be having another workshop that we'll be launching tomorrow on mentorship with MVP Youth, or Youth Vulnerable to Involvement in Violence and Crime, on June 21st. So we'll be emailing out and promoting that workshop as well. And then we'll take a bit of a break for the summer and back in September. So stay tuned for our future trainings. Again, I hope everyone has picked up a toolkit and an evaluation form, which are over there by the coffee in that corner of the room. We really encourage you to fill out the evaluation form and give us your feedback to help us plan future trainings. And yes, I'm going to now introduce and pass it over to Alan from the John Howard Society to lead us through the workshop. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. So my name's Alan. I work for John Howard Society. I do pre-employment counseling and pre-employment workshops for men with a criminal record. I don't work exclusively with youth. I work with anybody that's 18 plus. I would say about half of the people I work with are what is considered youth as far as social service programming goes. And then I also work with people directly inside the Toronto South Detention Centre. So I work with people who are currently incarcerated and help them on their release planning back into the community, on employment, and any other issues that they might be having, housing, mental health, substance use counseling, or anything else that comes up. So just to start, just to get a kind of sense of who is in the room today, let's just quickly go around, and if everybody just wants to introduce themselves, just your name and the agency that you work for. I guess we'll just start right to my left. Okay, perfect. So we are at the back. Thank you. So we are going to be going through all the information that's in the toolkit today, but I'm just wondering, is there any other topics outside of what's in this booklet that people are hoping to get more information about or discuss today? Yeah. They are up at the front in a box to the right-hand side. Yeah. And everybody should have a case study in front of them. Just hang on to that. We're going to be using those after the break, so we don't need to worry about those for right now. Let's give everybody a second to grab a toolkit. Hi. Yeah, for sure. Okay. So we'll just start off with some definitions. So, and right from the start, this kind of sets the tone for how you're going to work with youth who are involved with the justice system. So, according to the Youth Criminal Justice Act, youth are defined as 12 to 17. Statistics Canada defines youth between 16 and 28, and the Toronto Youth Equity Strategy defines youth as 13 to 29. So when people hear, I know almost everybody here in here is a youth worker, but you need to remember that when you're working with anybody over the age of 18 years old, 18 and older, according to the law, they're adults. So even though within our programming they're considered youth, when it comes to the impacts of a criminal record, the way that they were charged and what's going to show up on a background check, they are adults under the Canadian Criminal Code. So while there is still some specific barriers to dealing with this age population outside of the criminal record, when you're working with people with a record, whether they're 18, 20, or 45, the record is going to have the same impact. Usually with youth, it can be more significant because of their age. It's usually where they are now is in closer proximity to when the record happened, which will change how they're going to have that discussion with an employer down the road. So a lot of employers now do require some type of criminal background check for employment. Legally, they're not mandated to do a criminal background check outside of very specific industries. So if you work in a seniors residential setting or with children, by law they do have to do a criminal background check, but in virtually every other industry it is the choice of the employer to do so, and there's no liability on them, which is where a lot of the confusion comes in. An employer thinks, if I don't do a background check, I hire somebody that has a record and there's an incident in the workplace, I can be held liable, is the thought process. When in reality there actually has never been a case where an employer has been held liable in Canada for hiring somebody with a record and then there being an incident in the workplace. But we can expect an employer to do everything that they think they need to sort of cover themselves in the event of a situation in the workplace. It's extremely common now. In the past, you would think, unless you're going to work for the government or in a financial institution or maybe for a managerial position, other than that, there wouldn't really be a background check. Now it's widespread. Warehouses, some bigger construction companies are doing background checks, shipping, receiving jobs, bigger restaurants. It's pretty common. So it's really important to be expecting that. Most of the time, an employer is going to put that right on their job posting. Must undergo a criminal background check. The good news is, must do a criminal background check doesn't mean we won't hire somebody with a criminal record. It just simply means we're going to do a check. If it says must have a clean criminal record, I just recommend people just move on to the next posting. At that point, but I mean, if they're going to do a background check, it just means they want to know. Usually are your charges related to the job you're doing? If you have fraud charges and you're applying for a job at a bank, it's related, not going to happen, If you have an assault charge from when you were 20 years old and now you want to go work in a restaurant or a construction site, it really shouldn't be relevant to the type of job that they're doing. So As a general rule, the Youth Criminal Justice Act protects the privacy of young persons who are found guilty of a crime. This is done through what's called an access period. So we do have on page 13, which we're not going to go through over and over, it does sort of break down how long that access period is open for, but youth records are different than adult records because they're only, based on what the offense was, they're only open for a certain amount of time, ranging anywhere from a few months or a few years, depending on the outcome of the charges and the severity of the crime. And then at which point, as long as there's no further contact with the justice system, then it will be sealed. What happens in this access period, though, is if someone is charged again as an adult within this access period, all that youth charge or charges are now brought onto their adult record and are open for employers to see indefinitely until the person gets a pardon. So let's say somebody's 17 years old, they get convicted, and then within that access period, they get convicted again at 18 years old. Now that youth charge is brought onto their adult record, and it might as well be an adult charge at that point. So the people that can access specifically a youth record is lawyers with consent, parents, guardians, the Crown, judges, courts, police officers, the directors of the correctional facilities where the youth is serving a sentence, the victim, and someone carrying out a criminal record check for a government job. Generally, with a youth record, it shouldn't be showing up to employers. Specifically for just the youth record. But again, if it's been brought up onto their adult record, now that is open information if someone decides to do a background check. It may limit a person's job options. The police aren't going to give any information to an employer other than a government employer, information about a youth record. However, employers can still ask someone to do a criminal background check, and if the person decides that they're going to be nervous about it or deny the employer the right to do a background check, it could put up red flags. Because as soon as an employer says, "Can we do this?" and someone says no, they're going to assume you're hiding something. One way to sort of limit the effects of any type of criminal record is to get what used to be called a pardon is now called a record suspension. This basically, it doesn't delete an individual's criminal record, it seals it. So for all employment purposes, that record is sealed and nobody has access to it. But in the event that the individual is convicted again, that record reopens and now everything's brought back onto the record. But the key there is they have to be convicted again. If someone gets a record suspension and they're charged but not convicted, that record will not come back. It isn't until after the conviction that everything is brought back onto the record. And in the future, if they ever wanted to apply for a record suspension again, it would include everything that was previously suspended in the past. So if you get a record suspension, or if an individual gets a record suspension, at that point, if you're asked by an employer, usually the question is, have you ever been convicted of an offense for which you have not been granted a pardon? Say no, you don't have a record, it won't show up. At that point, you're just like anybody else applying for a job without a record, and you don't have to worry about it. And also, like I mentioned in the video, summary convictions after 5 years should not show up on a criminal background check when it comes to employment. Just in November 2018, the province standardized police checks across the province. So in some places this wasn't happening, and now it's supposed to be happening everywhere. I haven't been getting enough feedback yet from people to really say if it's consistently not, summary convictions are consistently not showing up after 5 years. I've had one person tell me it's not showing up for him, but then I've had other people tell me it is. So with this, as with all new legislation, it's just sort of waiting for that to fully come into effect. But it is safe to tell people that if they have summary convictions that are more than 5 years old, it shouldn't be showing up. Summary convictions are considered a less serious offense. So summary conviction would be something, theft under 5,000, fraud under 5,000, maybe a simple assault, mischief, break and enter, as opposed to an indictable conviction, which is a more serious offense. That's aggravated assault, fraud or theft over 5,000, attempted murder, and what's considered a more serious crime. So anybody can apply for a record suspension as long as they meet certain eligibility criteria. So depending on the way that someone was sentenced, either a summary or an indictable conviction, you have to wait from the day your sentence was completed, 5 years for a summary conviction or 10 years for an indictable. A completed sentence means a number of things. That means any time spent in custody is completed, any probation, parole, and any fines, restitutions, victim surcharges are fully paid off. This doesn't mean fines, like if somebody has a drinking in public fine, that doesn't make them ineligible. If somebody has fines under the Highway Traffic Act, it doesn't necessarily make them ineligible. These are fines that are tied directly to a criminal charge. So say you got charged for a theft, you stole $1,000 worth of items and the court ordered you to pay that $1,000 back. That's directly tied to your criminal charge. If you do not pay that back, your sentence is not considered complete. So let's say somebody finished probation 10 years ago today, but they have a restitution or a fine from that charge and they haven't paid it off yet, their sentence is not considered complete. They would have to pay it off today and then wait the 5 or 10 years from today, the date that the fine was fully paid off. This is really important to try to figure out, especially when we're working with people who are currently on conditions, if they do have fines to pay off, helping them find a way to start paying off that fine from now, because honestly, it's the most heartbreaking thing to tell somebody, you know, you haven't been in trouble with the police in 15 years, but you owe $60 or $100 or $1,000, and now you need to wait another 5 or 10 years just because you didn't pay something off that you didn't know you had or you're not able to afford to pay. So it's really important to encourage people, let's start figuring out a way to pay that off as soon as possible while you're still on your conditions. And then for anyone who was convicted before March 13th, 2012, convicted, not the day their sentence ended. This is about the conviction date. They fall under the old laws of a pardon, and that wait time is lessened, and it's 3 years for a summary, 5 years for an indictable. Which is a result of the federal government in 2012 decided to change the eligibility and the wait times for a record suspension. The Parole Board of Canada is the government body who grants people record suspensions. That's it. There's no wiggle room there. There's nobody else that can make a pardon be considered more seriously or go any faster. It's the Parole Board of Canada. Full stop. You might come across companies advertising that they can expedite a pardon process, or they can help you get it done earlier than the eligibility time says, or they can make it go faster, or they can influence the outcome of the decision. It's not true. There's not really much else to say on that point. It's just, you have to wait the amount of time, you have to submit your application to the parole board has to grant your record suspension. It's very straightforward. If anything is outside of that eligibility criteria, they're not going to grant the record suspension. Where getting the assistance of a company to apply for a record suspension does come in handy is there's two main ways. One is there's a lot of paperwork to go through, and when somebody else can do that for you, it's a lot less of a headache, and it just makes sure that all the documentation is done correctly. And two, they know how to answer the questions that the parole board wants. It's in writing, not in person. So you're going to need to answer, why do you want a record suspension? You're going to need to talk about every conviction on your record. Even if you don't remember, you still need to talk about that situation. You just have to be honest and say, I don't really remember because, and they're going to want to know about any positive changes you've made since your last conviction. And working with somebody who helps people put their record suspension applications together, they know what the parole board is looking for. They know how to word these answers in a way that makes it satisfactory for the parole board. And that's important too. So a lot of clients we're going to end up working with can't get a record suspension at this time. And as soon as you tell somebody you have to wait 8 years before you're eligible for a record suspension, their face drops. I like to follow that up with telling them what the parole board is looking for and then encouraging to encouraging them on this is what you can do until then. So, yeah, you have to wait 8 years, but the parole board is looking for any positive changes you've made. That gives you 8 years to do what you need to do to show the parole board that they should give you that pardon when it comes, or sorry, that record suspension when it comes up. So anything you can do between now and then. Because, if you wait the 5 years or the 10 years and then you go to the parole board and what have you done since your record suspension, and you don't have an answer for that, they might not want to give you the record suspension. They want to see that you're trying to move forward. If you can say, I've worked these jobs, but I'm getting stuck at entry-level positions because of my record, or I went to school, I did this training, I did drug and alcohol counseling, I reconnected with my family, just any sort of positive changes, they're going to look at that more kindly, and it's more likely that you're going to get the record suspension. The record suspension is great. I don't like to work from the point of view, though, of counting on the record suspension to help people move forward, because the reality is some people have to wait a long time. Some people are never going to get a record suspension due to fines that they owe. When somebody tells you that they owe $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 in fines, it's not always realistic to assume that they're going to be paying that off anytime soon. So we need to work from the point of view, okay, what can we do to help you move forward from now? So starting, it's really important to let people know what shows up on a record check. Someone in the video mentioned encouraging people to get a record check done on themselves. I always encourage this, because it really puts you at a disadvantage when an employer can see what you've done and you don't even know what they're going to have access to. Some people think, I have assault charges and lots of drug possession charges and a trafficking charge, but really what happened in the court process was, that assault with a weapon was downgraded to a simple assault, or that robbery charge was downgraded to a theft. So what they think is on the record, because that's what they were initially charged with, is actually a lot more severe than what's actually going to show up to an employer. I did go over the types of background checks in the video, but just quickly to review: criminal background check, convictions that have not been pardoned, that's it. The criminal record and judicial matters check, convictions, any other findings of guilt, so absolute discharge for 1 year, conditional discharge for 3 years, and so just any findings of guilt in general, and then the vulnerable sector screening, which is done primarily working with vulnerable populations, so most of the time children and seniors, convictions, findings of guilt, current charges, any outstanding warrants, any charges where there was no finding of guilt, so anything that was withdrawn, dropped, stayed, or dismissed will show up, and contacts where someone is found not criminally responsible due to mental health for 5 years will show up as well. At this stage, if someone did receive a pardon, but it was for a sexual offense, it will still get flagged on a vulnerable sector screening. It won't show up on a regular criminal background check, but on a vulnerable sector screening, sexual offenses will absolutely still get flagged. So working with vulnerable populations is still going to be not an option for somebody who has sexual offenses. This is important. So breaking down just what types of sentences there are. A lot of the time, I'm not sure how often everybody else comes across this. You ask somebody, what's on your record? I don't know. Or it was an assault charge. Okay, how were you sentenced? I don't know. Did you get convicted? I'm not sure. And then they explain it and you try to sort of decipher what they're saying. Like, oh, that sounds like a conditional discharge. Yeah, I think that might be it. Absolute conditional discharge are when the person admits guilt, but they're not given a conviction. So an absolute discharge is basically the person says, yes, I'm guilty, and the Crown says, okay, we're not going to do anything else about this. You've admitted guilt, but we don't want to give you a conviction record, and we don't want to give you any conditions. So this is going to show up on your record for 1 year, and then after that, it's going to fall off, and you're good to go. A conditional discharge the person still needs to admit guilt, but this is different because they're going to be given a set of conditions they need to abide by. So something similar to a probation. So that could be for any amount of time. Let's say it's 1 year. So if for 1 year you follow these certain conditions, don't contact the victim, keep the peace, be of good behavior, attend anger management counseling, and as long as you meet all those conditions, after 1 year, you won't be given a conviction. And this will fall off your record in 3 years. But with the conditional discharges, if the person does breach the conditions that they are outlined for them, then they most likely will end up with a conviction record. There's a suspended sentence. So suspended sentence involves conditions in a probation order for a period of 1 to 3 years. A suspended sentence is a conviction, but what this does is it allows the person to avoid actual custodial time. So instead of going into a jail or a prison for that 1 to 3 years, they'll just be out in the community with probation conditions, and as long as they abide by their conditions, they don't have to go to jail. Probation is conditions that are set out by the courts as a result of a sentencing. So sometimes the person can get just probation, sometimes the person will go to jail, and then when they're released, then they have probation for a certain amount of time. Conditions can be anywhere from very, very simple. In the simplest case, you're going to get keep the peace and be of good behavior, which is on every single probation order, no matter what the charge is. And this basically means don't break the law again. And not reporting. And that's the most simple one. You don't have to report to anyone, keep the peace, be of good behavior. That's it. Those are tricky because an interaction, it leaves room for discretion. If somebody is involved in an incident where the police are called, what's to say that the officer that responds can't decide you're not keeping the peace, Yeah, it's only a noise complaint, but a noise complaint is not keeping the peace. You're not being of good behavior because you are disturbing your neighbors. So sometimes there's a lot of flexibility there, but generally, as long as the people just kind of keep their head down for that, and then it can be all the way up to severely restrictive. So, you're going to have keep the peace, be of good behavior. You could have to report regularly once a week to your employer in person, do addictions counseling, anger management counseling, stay away from the victim or a certain area. You could have to pay back a fine or a restitution order. And then when there's conditions, that sometimes just kind of sets people up to end up in further conflict with the justice system. And that's important to know what someone's conditions are, just to make sure that nothing we do is going to put that person in a situation where they may get a failure to comply with their probation order. So for example, I had someone call me to do my program. We're right beside a school. He's not allowed within a certain distance from any schools. So we have to make sure we ask people ahead of time, do you have any conditions that insist that you stay away from children or from schools? Because I don't want to tell someone to come in for an intake. They come to my office, there's a school right beside us, and then now that person goes to jail because they tried to do my program. So it's just important to be aware. Or, if somebody says I'm not allowed in a certain distance of this establishment, this corner, whatever it is, then we need to kind of navigate that with the person and not really send them to job interviews or programs that are within their restricted area. Some people can just end up with a fine. They're usually going to get a conviction and then they just have to pay back a fine. This could come with probation, it could come with jail time, it could just simply be a fine that the person has to pay back. And then there is jail time. The person's either going to go to a provincial correctional complex or a federal penitentiary. Provincial time is done if the person is sentenced to 2 years less a day. Is when they go to provincial. Federal is anything over 2 years. Usually the Crown will sentence them to 2 years less a day or 2 years plus a day if they want to give them the max amount of time but not give them a federal record. Some people honestly decide they want to go to the penitentiary as opposed to a provincial institution. Happens sometimes where if the person's going to get 2 years less a day, they'll request that they get 2 years plus. simply because there's more programming and opportunities available for them in the federal penitentiary. That's not for us to really suggest what someone should do in that. Generally, the person's lawyer is going to kind of help them through that process. Having a federal record is definitely more restrictive, though, because once you have a federal record, pretty much anything else you do is going to result in further federal time. Not all the time, but the Crown is going to look for that. So let's say you have a federal record, now you get an assault charge. The average person without a record or just a provincial record on an assault charge is not going to be doing federal time, but if someone has a federal record, the Crown is going to immediately be looking for 2 years or more. And then if the person is released on parole, is infinitely more restrictive than a probation order. Parole is when you are sentenced to a federal time and you are released before that sentence is served, and you serve the remainder of that sentence in the community. So let's say you were sentenced to 5 years in prison, and they let you out on parole after 3.5. For the next 1.5 years, you're on parole, and if you breach the conditions of your parole, you're sent back to prison for the remainder of your sentence. Parole is, you have to let them know where you're living, where you're going to be at all times. They can drug test you at any given time. The parole officer can show up at your house, your place of employment, without warning, just to check in that you're there. So it's a lot more restricting. There's an intermittent sentence. It's called, usually when people say they do weekends or weekend jail, it's normally you serve your sentence. Sometimes, most of the time it's on a weekend, but sometimes it could be maybe a couple days during the week depending on your schedule. So that gives you the opportunity to be out in the community, going to work, going to school, whatever you're doing. Friday comes, you go to jail. Monday morning comes, you go back to work. This is usually for sentence of less than 60 days, or it says here 90 days or less. A lot of the time I find when someone's gonna do 90 days a weekend, they sometimes prefer to just do the 90 days straight through, because you're gonna serve 2/3, so you're gonna serve 60 days. So instead of going to jail 90 for that long, they prefer to just kind of get it all done in one stretch. Yeah, and then there's a conditional sentence, also called house arrest, which is basically, it is a jail sentence, except the person serves the sentence outside of jail under jail-like conditions. So usually it's house arrest, and then the severity of what that's like depends on the individual. So you might just have to stay at home the whole time. You might be able to leave your house accompanied by the person that's been assigned to you by the court. It's usually like a caregiver or a parent of the sorts that will be able to do that. Yeah, and I talked about parole, and then there's bail. Bail is just when you have been charged, you haven't been convicted, and the courts decide that you're able to await your trial or your sentencing in the community instead of in jail, and you're going to have specific conditions that you need to abide by on bail. So again, it's going to be not contacting certain people, possibly reporting to the courts on a regular basis. You might have a curfew. You might not be able to be in the community without your surety. So for example, let's say it's your caregiver, and then they would have to escort you anytime you were outside of their residence. So if you wanted to go to a job interview, if you wanted to go to a program, they might have to be with you, unless the court makes special exceptions to allow you to leave at certain times. Okay, so that's just all the simple breakdown of all the sort of more legal terms, just so everybody kind of has a clear idea on what I mean going forward with everything. So in some cases, we're working with people that are currently on conditions: bail, probation, parole. And this is going to, in some cases more than others, have a huge impact on the type of work somebody's able to do, when they're able to do it, how they're able to do it, and how they're going to have that discussion with an employer. So, let's say you get a job, but now your probation officer wants proof of employment to approve the place that you're working. How are you going to ask your employer for a letter of employment on your first day there? Or as part of the job interview, Oh, by the way, can you give me a letter so I can tell my probation officer that I'm working here? It doesn't always go over well. or it can just be a difficult conversation to have. Sometimes they might be willing to wait for a pay stub. And then, okay, now you have to report once a week. You know, if you need to go see your probation officer every Thursday afternoon, how are you going to ask for every single Thursday afternoon off of work, especially if you just started working there, you know? You start working on a Tuesday, and a couple days in already, it's, oh, by the way, I need to take Thursday afternoon off. Or you just call in sick. And then again, now you're calling in sick your first, second week on the job, and it also doesn't look good. You're probably going to get fired if you call in sick in the first week of your job. So here, that's where it becomes very important to have a good relationship with your probation officer, or I'm just going to just call it PO, just short form from here on in. It's important to have a good relationship with your PO. Whenever people have conditions where they're mandated to do some things, I always recommend do what your PO tells you. Just do it. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like it. You don't have to be happy about it, but just do it. If they want you to do anger management, go to anger management right away. The first day you're out of jail, go sign up for anger management program. If they want you to do addictions counseling, do it. If they want you to do community service, just go do it. Because if you've got 2 years of probation, in the first 6 months of your probation, you've done everything they've asked you to do, most of the time they're going to lay off a little bit. And they have the authority to lessen how much you have to report. You might have to report every week or every 2 weeks when you first get out, but if you're meeting the conditions of your employment, if you're reporting regularly, if you're attending the programs they want you to attend, they might say, okay, come in once a month. If you tell them you have employment, they might say, you know what, I'll accommodate your schedule. Call me once a week. Maybe we can see you early in the morning or later in the evening. And as long as you're upfront with them, they're usually willing to accommodate. I know with my program, a lot of the time guys will say, the program's only 4 weeks, and they say, okay, I have to miss the first and third Tuesday because I have a probation meeting. I'm just like, do you want to go to probation or do you want to come here? Usually they say, I don't want to miss any days here. So I'm like, all right, just call the probation officer, tell them that this person's in an employment program. 99% of the time, the PO is thrilled. Like, oh, he's in a program? Oh, he's looking for employment? Oh, you're going to help him get a job, go to school? Oh, perfect, don't worry, I'll get him in on Thursdays for those 2 weeks, just so it doesn't interfere with the program. They don't want that person to breach. If the individual on probation or parole is meeting all their conditions, that's less work for the PO. Because now they don't have to worry about chasing the person down, they don't have to worry about breaching them, they don't have to worry about calling them and being on their case to getting them to do what they're supposed to do as part of their conditions. If you're on bail, speak to your lawyer. Because you might have to attend court, you know, sometimes there's a court date every week, every other week. You go to court, they say be there at 10 in the morning, you sit there till 12, and then at 12 o'clock they say, okay, come back next week, right? And then the next week, okay, come back next week. And now you're taking days off from work, you're missing programs, whatever it is, just to go to a court appearance that you might not have had to been at the first place. And a lot of those preliminary hearings, your lawyer is able to attend court for you. You don't actually have to be present. And your lawyer will let you know if it's important if you're present at certain court dates or not. And honestly, it's going to look good to the courts as well if your lawyer says, so-and-so wasn't able to attend court today because they're at work. You know, that's going to look good in the eyes of the court as well. If you're required to report as a condition of bail, so if you're on like some sort of bail program or enhanced bail or supervised bail program, where they expect you to report regularly, usually once a week, provide them with proof of employment as well. Bring them your first pay stub, get them a job letter. Again, more than likely, they're going to be willing to accommodate your schedule to an extent because you're doing something positive. Most of the time, people don't want to breach you. You know, they don't want to send you back to jail. They don't want to be on your case. Again, it's more work. And whenever possible, just give your employer notice. That's the number one thing. You know, if you have vacation days, personal days, sick days, use them. If you know you need to report once a month, take a personal day if that's something that you have as part of your job. If you have paid sick days, you know, use them. Again, use half a sick day if you need to. You might not even have to tell if it's a sick day, you don't have to tell your employer that it's a probation meeting. You're not feeling well, you have a medical appointment or just an appointment. So if you're in a position, where you've been somewhere for a longer amount of time and now you have conditions to abide by, use any days that you have given to you. When possible, give the employer a heads up, especially if you're in a job where if you don't show up, everything is going to get slowed down for the day. The employer will appreciate the heads up. Or if you've been honest with your employer from the start, just tell them you have probation, If an employer is willing to hire you with a record, they're probably willing to accommodate you as well, because they've already taken that chance, they already like you, they already want you to work there. And if you say, I need to miss half a day once a month because I have to go to probation, they're probably going to be okay with it. And then give them options as well, Okay, every last Thursday of the month, I have a probation meeting for half a day. Can I make up those hours somewhere else? What can I do to be prepared for that day that I have to miss to make sure I don't set everybody else's schedule behind? Can I come in on a Saturday? Can I stay late for an hour for the week before to make sure my work is done? Give them options as well. Don't come to the employer with, I have to miss a day and make them figure it out. Go to them with, I have to miss a day and solutions to how that's not going to affect your work or anybody else's work. An employer is going to appreciate that every single time. I guarantee it. So any conversations are good. Also, be realistic on what you're able to do. Depending on how restrictive your conditions are, consider part-time employment or full-time. Consider working evenings, night times, weekends. Sometimes in the short term, it might not be possible to work a full-time job, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. If you have to report, can you work an afternoon shift? Can you work 4 to midnight? That way your probation's never going to interfere. Can you work a night shift? If you have to be at probation once a week, anger management meetings, and another program, can you work part-time while you're kind of getting some of these programs out of the way just to get some income in, keep yourself relevant in the job market without breaching any of your conditions? Because when you're on conditions, that should be the priority, is not breaching, not going against your conditions, and not going back to jail or to jail. Should be the goal every single time. That's what the court expects. Yes, the courts generally want to see the individual doing well, going to school, taking programs, going to work. But really, at the end of the day, the main reason there is to say, here's our conditions, don't breach them or you're in trouble. So that is the main concern, is just kind of making sure we don't put people in a position or helping set that person up to get another charge. And if employment's not an option, what can you do in the interim? Can you upgrade your skills? Can you go to school? Can you go to an employment program? Can you go to resume writing workshops? What can you do in the meantime to keep yourself active? Like it was said in the video, you don't want to tell an employer what you're not doing. You want to be able to tell them what you're doing. So instead of saying, yeah, I haven't worked for the past year because my probation was too restrictive, it's, in the past year, I have been going to school part-time. I've done these programs. I've gotten these certificates. I now have my forklift, my WMIS, my working at heights, and my first aid, and I've just been upgrading my skills while I'm looking for employment to get back into the workforce. And if somebody does have a long-term employment goal, what can you be doing in the short term to reach the long-term goal? And this applies to the pardon as well. If you have to wait 4 years for a pardon, and you can't do the job you want to do until you get that, what can you be doing for the next 4 years that's going to set you up for success at that point instead of starting from square one in 4 years? School's an option. You're going to be in school minimum a year, usually 2 to 4 years. There's a couple of years gone out of that wait time right from the start. Or with school, you can miss a day of school, and you're not going to get fired from school because you had to go to a probation meeting. So really it's just important to kind of keep everybody in the loop as much as possible, but again, without really divulging too much information. You don't necessarily need to tell the employer every single thing about the probation, about the probation conditions. So number one, first step, very first step in any job, whether you have a record or not, is your resume. You know, resume is going to tell the employer why should we even call you in for an interview. When you have a record, you know, of course, you're not going to be putting that you have a criminal record on your resume, but there could be gaps in employment because of your criminal record. You know, if you did 6 months in jail 4 times in the past 2 years, or in the past 3 years, if you spent 3 years in jail, you know, if you're on probation or bail and not working, now there's going to be gaps, and now you need to explain that somehow. And you want to preferably not have that extremely apparent in the resume. It's easier to have that discussion once you get to the interview instead of in that first step. Because if an employer sees your resume right from the start and it just says the person worked from 2016 and then they worked again in 2018 for 4 months and then in 2019 for a couple months and then all these gaps in between, right away that's red flags. That's red flags from the employer. So before I say what I have to say, I just want to get an idea, when somebody is working with somebody with a resume, what are some things that you tell them or things that you help them work on to try to minimize those gaps in their resume? Yeah.
So the type of resume they make. So if a chronological resume would be an issue because there are those clear gaps, you can either do functional, styled, or a combination to try and put the skills that they do have at the front, right, their front page, breaking it down, and then leaving their work history at the end as a cliff note of from this state to this state,
Yeah.
to draw those things. Or you can tell them that to explain some of those gaps with, had issues with family I had to take care of, unfortunately I wasn't able to work, or pursuing school or other skills that they have padded out their few stints in unemployment.
Yeah, absolutely. So just in case everybody didn't hear, the answer was use different types of resumes. So, you know, instead of using a chronological resume, which is going to very clearly show when and where someone worked, use a functional or a combination type resume. Focus on their skills, highlight what the person's able to do, and then the employment history is on the bottom. And it's more of a cliff note compared to the rest of the skills. Or if there is major gaps in employment, find a way to explain those to the employer. I couldn't work because I had to take care of my family, or fill in the gaps with anything else that you were doing as well. Yeah.
I just want to comment on something because I'm a Java developer. I've seen the functional resume works well when people they have like a big gap. But sometimes the employer will ask them, I was in a meeting, I was in an interview with a client, when was that? And they ask me. So whoever goes, you need to train with the clients how to answer that.
Yeah. So the comment was, an employer now might ask when the person uses a functional resume, they're going to follow up in the interview with when did you do that. So then at that point now we need to help the person how to answer those questions in an interview. It can be expected for that to come up for sure. I believe it's easier though to talk about that in person instead of having it on a piece of paper, you know? 2 years on a piece of paper looks like a long time just at a quick glance, and you might not even get the interview. If you can get to the interview stage, you're already in front of that person. Now they have to listen to you. So that gives you the opportunity to explain that situation and tell them now this is what I was doing, instead of just there's no work history for 2 years. Also, get creative with what is experience, skills and experience, especially if you're using a functional type resume. The experience that person has isn't tied directly to each position. You know, so if you can, as long as you can do what you say you can do, tell the employer. Don't lie. Don't tell them you can, you know, use power tools, then you show up on the job and ask them what a drill is. That's not going to go over too well, you know? But if you helped your uncle build a deck, you have carpentry experience. If you know, grew up cutting your parents' lawn and weeding their garden, you've got landscaping experience. Take advantage of that. If you volunteered If you volunteered at a food bank and you had to help talk to people when they were upset or arguing or in crisis, guess what? You have conflict resolution skills, even if you only did it once a week for a couple months. You know, as long as you can do what you say you can do, tell that to the employer. And again, you might have to speak about where you did that in the interview, but you're already sitting in front of the person. They have to listen to you now. They've given you that half an hour to talk, 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever it is. So now they've got to listen to you. So you might as well take advantage of that. Time. Yeah, and then all the other basic resumes, you know, just making sure that it's well written, no spelling mistakes. And then a couple parts that are traditionally have been on resumes that I now suggest people not to put on the resume. One, an address, home address. Personally, I say don't do it. It's optional if somebody really wants to, but there's more harm it can do than good. The only positive aspect I can see is if you live very close to the location of the work and they want someone that's either in that community or they're worried about commuting. But what it can do is, you know, if I live in Scarborough and I want a job in Etobicoke, it doesn't matter how I'm getting there and it doesn't matter how long it takes me. All that should matter to the employer as long as I'm there on time every day. But if they see that I live across the whole city and I'm taking TTC, already they're considering not giving me that job because of it. Or maybe the person lives in an area that has a certain reputation, stigma, or association with it. Again, there's a good chance an employer can look at that and just make a judgment based on the address that they see on a piece of paper. So you're giving the employer information without really getting something out of giving them that information, right? Next part is an objective. That objective has been on a resume for a long time. Personally, I tell people it's optional as well. Your objective is to get that job. They know that you submitted the resume to apply for the position. Now they know that's what your objective is. If someone is going to use an objective, make it very specific to the position. When I see the seeking full-time employment within your organization, right away I cross that out. I'm like, I know that. You already gave me your resume. I know it. Skip that part. If you're going to use an objective, be specific. Again, I say it's optional. And then as well as on the functional resume, in this one, I sometimes get some questionable looks for, but on a functional resume, if you don't have to, don't put the years of the employment. Answer that in the interview. Personally, I have not had an address and objective or the years of my employment on my resume for probably like 8 years now. I've never had an issue getting interviews. I've always had to talk about the timelines in the interview. But again, the whole point of me doing that was I was in school, I was new to social services, and I was trying to minimize a lack of experience in a certain field, and I was willing to talk about it in person, but I didn't want to get disqualified before I even got there. So the same thing, just don't put the years on the resume. Answer those questions later. They can and probably will ask. Yeah.
No, I'm just enlightened.
Like, I didn't think about it before, but a lot of these things that you're saying make so much sense. Like your address is really not necessary.
No?
Like it just like you said, it just gives them ideas that they don't need.
Exactly.
So why, okay, maybe I should answer that in this way then, because why aren't we doing workshops? I have an employment council at my workplace, and still having young people do that with timelines and all that kind of stuff, addresses and all that stuff. But what really makes sense. So why are we not having more of that kind of discussion, especially the group that we are listening to?
Yeah, I think I've noticed if you go to 5 different places, you'll get five different resumes. I know that things like not putting the address, not putting the objective, not putting dates are fairly, like somewhat more recent. Even in like the past maybe like 5 years or so that I've been seeing that a lot more. I don't know. Generally when I go do workshops, when I say those things, still I get a lot of pushback on, well, you have to put the years. You need to tell the employer when they work there. But I think it's just still shifting away from what's traditionally on a resume, and then it's going to take time for that to get implemented across the board. No problem. Yes.
Hi, I work directly with employers, hiring managers and decision makers. And so it's one of the questions that I'm constantly asking them is, what do you expect to see on a resume? And it's sector specific, so we trade for entry-level hospitality positions. And HR, it's sort of like the changing of the old guard. We still have that expectation where they want to see a specific thing in that objective. So seeking entry-level employment as a busser example, right? And they also do expect, and again, these are the ones that we work with, and they do expect to see employment dates, even not just year, but like month, year.
Month, year? Yeah.
Yeah, so they're pretty specific, and we do work with this, this sector that it doesn't really serve them well to put that down because it's 2 months here, 3 months there. So it's, for me, it's a case-by-case basis, but they also have us advocating for them, where I'm sending the resumes directly along with a bio. But when they're just applying on job boards or, it's tricky because I get what you're saying 100% and I agree, but I'm also being told by our industry that no, they're kind of old school. So
Yeah.
just conflicting information.
Yeah.
Hi.
Anyone else gets that?
So sorry, I just want to interrupt. I'm happy to see the hands, but if you are sitting by a microphone, can you please use it? And if you're in the back, maybe you can come use a microphone. We are live streaming today, and the live stream will only pick up audio through the microphones. Thank you.
So the comment there was that in the hospitality industry, employers are still expecting to see dates, years, and in some cases, months and years, depending on the employer. And it's just sort of it sounds like a transitional period where people that were in like human resources that still expect to see those things are now sort of getting older, and then there's new people coming in that might not expect to see it. So in certain industries or in specific sectors, they still might be expecting to see years depending on who's doing the hiring. And that's a very good point. So if someone has access to speak to someone that works in a specific sector, that can definitely always help to get that inside information. And then, so I see a lot of hands. I'm just gonna kind of go this way, if that's all right.
For what you choose to exclude off your resume, you also have to keep in mind the person you're doing that resume for. If you don't have dates on there, then you're putting a lot more responsibility on that person's interview skills. So if they're a very charismatic person who is able to explain adequately why those gaps are there, great, you're right, you'll remove a barrier by doing that. But if it's someone who lacks a little bit of confidence, or is not that good of a public speaker, or at least in that stressful setting, then you may force them to explain things they're not necessarily comfortable with, or have them hiccup on some of those things that the employer may have just never asked if they already saw those dates to begin with.
Yeah.
So be mindful on the person you're doing this for.
Absolutely. So did everybody hear that? Yes? Okay.
I just wanted to comment on the resume. It's case by case when you are trying to put addresses for the clients. For example, I have an experience. I have a connection with the employers. It depends upon the employer's needs. I may put addresses. It depends. Because some employers wanted to hire a client who lives around their organization because of the attendance issues that they have experience with, and some of them, my local businesses, they would like to invest and hire clients who lives in the area. So it is case by case, and also educate employers, because putting addresses, it may hinder our clients, because in some areas they may not hire people in certain mailbox, like, if you have some certain, you must have been heard that, including banks and institutes, all that. So we need to be mindful and then also educate employers in the meantime until the system got it. The system has problem. That's the problem. So get an experience, build a relationship with the employers and also try to protect the clients. I don't actually personally agree putting addresses when the clients goes to job fairs or apply online.
Yeah.
I always discourage that. They don't need to, because it's a confidential issues. There's so many things, and discrimination is out there. It's not, I'm not saying it. It's like black and white. We see it every single day. So why you put people in that area? So we need to really, mixing it up and see which one works for the clients. It's case by case. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm just curious as to individuals that want to volunteer. So you mentioned earlier that legally employers are not mandated to conduct criminal ethics check. So I guess my question is, if an individual wants to volunteer with an organization in the hopes of obtaining employment, now, can the employer then use, I suppose, a judgment call to conduct a reference check, or it's not necessary?
With volunteering and background checks, it honestly depends on what the nature of the volunteer position is and the expectations or the requirements of the agency hiring them. So just to kind of give like a few examples, I've seen places where they don't do a background check at all. And that's usually working with adults, they won't do a background check for volunteers. Other places I've seen where it doesn't matter if you have a record, but there might be certain things you can't do. So for example, you can work in the drop-in program where it's mostly adults, but you're not allowed to work in the food bank part because it's a family food bank and there are children present. And there's children's programming attached to the food bank, so they don't let people with the records work in that part, but they let them in the other parts of the organization. And then I've seen it actually just with someone I'm currently working with where he was volunteering and it was not a problem, but when they wanted to hire him and they did the background check, they weren't able to hire him because of the record. And now that's interfered with his volunteer opportunities as well, but they never did the background check before. So that's really like a case by case, depending. Working with adults and social services is usually safe with the record.
Thank you. Just the second part to that really quickly. So let's say in the event the employer does hire the individual. So the employer hires the individual, but let's say, hypothetically speaking, an issue occurs, right? And does the employer face liability?
No, there's never been an incident of that in Canada.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if the individual conducts whatever criminal activity, so to speak, the employer will not face any kind of legal accountability?
No, the only time there would be any sort of liability there is if in very specific sectors where a vulnerable sector screening is mandated, so like with children and with seniors and like residential, like seniors' homes, and anything where they're required to, there will be, but outside of that, just for any other job, no. There's never been an incident in Canada where an employer was held liable for hiring someone with a record and an incident happened. Employers think that they will, and in the US, they very likely will because you can sue anybody there for anything. And a lot of the information that we get is from the US, or a lot of the culture and the media we have exposure to is American. So people tend to have certain expectations or certain assumptions based on American information, but they don't know that it doesn't apply here. Like the big thing when I tell people summary indictable, it's like, I don't know what that is. When I ask people felony and misdemeanor, oh yeah, I know what that is, right? And it's like, that's not part of the Canadian criminal justice system, but because when we see movies, nobody ever goes to jail for an indictable charge in a movie. They're there for a felony, right? So there's a lot of misinformation, especially with employers. And an employer is generally going to do what they believe they need to do for the long-term security and success of their business. And it seems like they would prefer to be more strict instead of less strict with their hiring practices, just in case something happens. So they're not liable, but they always think that they are. Yeah.
Is there somewhere I can refer to this? I mean, absolutely, I believe what you're saying.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if I can get some more information in terms of websites or books or something, so I can refer to that somewhere.
John Howard Society of Ontario and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association just recently did a study and a workshop and a PowerPoint presentation on this, working like how for information for employers to know about hiring people with a criminal record. You should be able to find that information online. I'm not sure if Laura has everybody here on like an email list.
If you registered through Eventbrite, I would have your emails. If not, connect with me after.
Yeah. Or I also have cards here, so if you want to connect with me after, I can email people that PowerPoint presentation that has some information and then links to further information as well. Yeah, no problem. And I think there was one more question here. Yes.
Is it on? Well, so I used to work in retail before. I worked in a retail store, and we got a lot of resumes that I submitted to the store directly. Those never go to the HR or headquarters, wherever, and it's just the manager looking at the resume, right? What he really wants is that, can you do the job? Do you have similar experience? Will you be on time? Like, he doesn't care like about what month, what year. That will be like information overload for him. So it really depends on the job and how they look through the resume. And in terms of address, I agree with everything has been said. Also, I have transgender client, and discrimination against them is like really real, and they have very bad experience before, so they really resist the idea of putting their home address on the resume just because of personal safety. So I think it depends on your clients too, and that's what I have to say.
Thank you. Somebody, yes.
Question for you. Can an employer request a criminal background check at any point in an employee's tenure with the organization, or is it only during the hiring process that they should be wary of that?
So an employer cannot request a criminal background check at any time of hiring unless it was a condition of employment. So they can't like impose that later on. You can't work there for a year and then now they say, now you got to do a background check. Where that kind of changes is, for example, to work for TDSB, you have to do a background check every year. But that's a condition of the employment that you have to do that, and that was agreed upon at the time of hiring. Or they might say, you know, you need to do a criminal background check on upon the completion of your probationary period. So then 3 months in, 6 months in, or whatever it is, they could request that. Or if you're applying for a new position, you know, you could work as, you know, entry level for 10 years, and then now you want to be a manager or a supervisor. It's a new position. Now there's new terms of employment, so they can ask for it. Yeah. Yes.
It could be a question for anyone in the room. I'm thinking about employer education resources, and I'm wondering if there's anything out there in terms of like short, concise, like handouts or something like that that we could take along to an employer as a job developer, for example, that we could kind of guide them through during a meeting. So we could address, like, this is an awesome resource, but it's quite long, even a 1 or 2 pager. I don't know if that sort of thing exists out there.
I don't have it, but if you connect with me later, that's definitely something we can work on, because I like that idea. Yeah. Okay, so, is there a question at the back?
since we're on the job topic.
Yes.
There is an opportunity of, working from a computer, having tech skills, and working anywhere in the world, freelancing. I'm just interested to know if anyone is involved in this kind of, work with youth or knows of any program as such, as in training youth to be tech savvy to, and the restrictions of convictions and what their record has or shows would have a lesser impact, and something to think about.
I don't have a lot of experience helping people working in tech, just to be completely honest with that one. And I don't know of any specific programs. From what I've been told that my guys that do work in tech, based on their experience, it depends, I think. Same thing, usually bigger companies, they don't have as much luck, but then with smaller companies or startups, they have more luck getting in.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
We work with an organization called C Toronto, serving Black youth between the ages of 18 and 29. And I know that CEE runs a program just exactly to do with what you've just asked with tech and social media, etc. So C Toronto, I can connect with you after and give you contact information. Okay?
How are you? Oh, perfect. Maybe you can connect that person with you.
CEE, C Toronto, C Toronto.
They are from the.
CEE.
They are from that program.
Hi.
If you have questions about that program, you may be able to connect with somebody today.
We're from the social studies program, though. Social work, yeah. They do a lot of stuff.
So, when someone does start looking for employment, there's a number of factors that are going to impact that come along with the criminal record. How long has that person been away from the field that they're looking to work in? Have they ever worked in that field before? What does the current political atmosphere look like? At certain times, we're tough on crime. When Canada decides to be tough on crime, unfortunately, that impacts people's day-to-day realities a lot more than others. Whether it's overtly or not by employers, that can definitely have an impact. It's important to everything that I do with people, I always just talk about short-term, long-term. All my clients are sick of me talking about short-term and long-term goals, but short-term, long-term, it's always it. So just yesterday we're talking about, should you disclose your record to an employer? And some people say, yes, you should, because you don't want to lie or you'll lose the job if you don't get it. But then I have another guy who's saying, he's like, you know what? He's like, I always lie about it because right now I just need money. And if I get fired in 2 months, I don't care. At least I got a few paychecks. So we don't necessarily have to, whether I or you agree or disagree with that point of view, that's the reality. If the short-term goal is just like, I need money today, it's like, so go get a job today. If you only get a few checks and you get let go, if that's what you need to improve your immediate reality, then sometimes that's something that needs to be done. So it's always short-term, long-term. Yeah.
So I just have a question on what advice would you give to someone if they ask that question? Should I let them know about my record? Should they do it right at the interview, right when they get hired, or after 3 month probation? Right? Like, what would be? It really depends on the crime. And
You're jumping ahead of me a little bit. We're actually getting up to that right now.
I'll wait my turn.
Okay. So first, it's just, I think we started a little bit late, so I'm just gonna I think we have a couple pages left, and then I'm gonna actually open it up for questions, for about 15 minutes or so before a break, if that's all right, and if everyone can just write their questions down, and then I'll make sure I address all those. Pardon? Yeah. So first it's just trying to get people, try not to be picky, and just reminding them again of the short-term, long-term that I keep talking about. So when somebody says, I don't want to work this type of job. I won't work for minimum wage. I won't work for anything less than $20 an hour, or they're demanding. Sometimes we need to help them see a little bit more realistically. It's like, I agree, you shouldn't have to work for minimum wage. But sometimes you have to work for minimum wage for a short amount of time, you know? It's easier to get a job when you have a job. An employer, if you're working somewhere, there's less questions because clearly you're employable. It's like, oh, if that person will hire you, why shouldn't I? But if you're not working, that's when questions come up. Why aren't you working? What are you doing right now? What have you been doing since your last job? Why did you leave your last job if you didn't have another? There's just tons of questions, and it's very hard to give an answer to those that satisfies an employer. So try not to be picky, you know? I'm not telling people to just take any job or take a job that is, you know, going to put them at risk or an unsafe work environment. Never going to recommend that. But sometimes in the short term, it's just like, get a job. And then also taking a look at what opportunities can you take now that are going to give you experience that are going to be helpful for you in the future. You know, can you volunteer? Or if you're working in a certain field, how does it relate? Okay, you want to work in the trades, but you can't get an apprenticeship right now, go labor somewhere. It's relevant experience, you know? You might have to do backbreaking work for $15 or $16 an hour, but again, if it's short term, you know, set an end date for yourself. You know, I'm giving myself 1 year, and after 1 year, I'm not gonna be working a minimum wage job anymore. Just kind of get yourself back into the habit of going to work every day and working. Research whether or not the company does criminal record checks. Simple way to do this, call and ask. I regularly call employers. I pretend like I'm interested in the job and I just ask them, if I have a criminal record, will I be disqualified from this position? Sometimes I get told yes, sometimes I get told no. A couple months ago, I got invited to an interview the next day. You know, I had to awkwardly kind of like be like, oh no, I'll call you. I need to think about it, but you know, so it's like, call human resources and just try to ask them. And they're not going to connect. If you're nervous about doing it, get a friend to do it. But they're not going to connect a phone call today to one of the 80 resumes coming across their desk tomorrow. You know, call from a private number. I don't know. Let your client use your phone, like your office phone. So it's a different phone number. I don't know, but call and ask is the simplest way. Like we've talked about, know what's on your record. Get a background check. Know exactly what that employer is going to see, and that gives you the opportunity to start crafting an answer ahead of time. You know, yeah, you might get different job interview questions as far as what the employer wants to know about the job, but if you need to talk about your record, that's the same story every time. Practice it, write it down, stand in front of the mirror, get your roommate to interview you and answer that question and give you feedback, videotape yourself and watch it and see how uncomfortable you look. Just that's a question that if it's going to come up, that's going to be the same answer every single time, regardless on the job. So practice, 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 know how to say it. And then work with a job developer, access a program, have people assist you into getting back into work, because there's people that exist, many of who are in this room right now, that this is like what we do. So we have that access that a person doesn't have. When my clients always say to me, you know, oh, it's not what you know, it's who you know. I'm like, yeah, it's true, but now you know me. And once you see our guest speakers that come in from all these other organizations, if you connect with them, now you know them. So who you know doesn't have to be a friend or an uncle that's a manager or in the union or something like that. It could just be people that have access to information or access to employers. So as to when you're going to talk about that record, I suggest waiting until the point of hiring when they require a background check. You know, so either when the employer brings it up, talk about it, or when it gets to the point, usually they're going to ask for a background check at the time when it comes to hire you. You've handed in your resume, you've gone through the interview process, they want to give you the job, and now they're going to say, before we can move forward with hiring you, we need a criminal background check. That's when you have that conversation. Yes, you can do a background check, but you know, just in the effort to be transparent and so there's no surprises, something is going to come up, and then you go into your story that you've practiced. I have, you know, I hear different things. I have some guys that tell me they want to It's the first thing they tell an employer. I don't suggest it because you're basically walking into an interview and saying like, hi, I'm criminal record. It's not a good start to the interview. Let them get to know you first. Do the interview. Let them get to know your skills. Let them get to know you as a person. Let them be interested in you. They want to know more. Maybe they want to hire you. And now you happen to be a person with a criminal record instead of a criminal trying to get a job from them. When there's a little bit more of like a personal connection there, it can help minimize that impact as much as possible, especially if you've gone through multiple interviews for that job. Now they know you, they're interested. Yeah.
Testing 1 2. Okay. So I want to just make a suggestion, because in all of this we have to be realistic, right? And sometimes we lose that realisticness in our suggestions. So when we're dealing with people with criminal records, we still have to remember they're competing against those that don't have criminal records, right? So that one individual have a criminal record, then I look at the other resume, they don't have a criminal record. You know, I want the one that doesn't have the criminal record, right? Not only that, not a lot of those with criminal records are articulate, you know. Blue collar criminals, right? Majority, right? So then we have to be a little bit more realistic to say, hey, a lot of these young people that have criminal records are not articulate. They're not going to nail the interview. They're going to be basic. So then the person who's hiring is going to say, well, should I get this guy and give him a chance, or just the person who's just better qualified? So in that reality, that person most likely won't get the job. So in my opinion, I would suggest for us to think about just building relationship with organization that will just now hire these guys. That means they know. So it's not a question of, oh, do you have a criminal record, or trying to get over and get to the table and say, oh yeah, I have a criminal record, or it pops up later. But rather than say, hey, let's, can we build relationship with organizations that say, hey, I'm going to send you guys with criminal records. They're going to be trained by employment developers and job developers. They're qualified. They went through a phase of training. They're qualified. Here what we have. And these organizations are already willing to say, okay, I'll take 5, or I'll take or something periodically, or something like that. I think that's more tangible, if you understand what I'm saying. Because a lot of this is just going on for years and years, and some people are getting in through the cracks, but reality, majority of them are not getting employed. Majority of them going back to crime. Majority of them going back to jail. So I think the angle that we attack this got to be a little bit more strategic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. We can't just focus on the connections, though. Like it's kind of depending on what people want to do, right? So I agree with you. We do need to be making more connections with employers and just finding opportunities where we can just place people in jobs. But depending on what an individual does for their type of work, we need to kind of just help them navigate that sometimes. So people we might work with might not be as articulate or know how to talk about that or talk about their skills. But even with the criminal record, but even outside of that, I think it's very important to teach them that. People can learn how to do a job interview, right? It's a skill. You know, at one point, everybody here was terrified of job interviews, I'm sure. And, you know, knees shaking or you're sweating and you don't know what to say. So it's like we also need to help people, like, teach them how to give these answers. We have some examples in here as well. And, like, I still try to keep it simple. You know, simple is best. So we absolutely do have to be realistic with opportunities. It's a fine line between the reality, though, but still like allowing people to have some hope to move forward with that. There is, by best estimate, you'll see a lot of numbers out there, but by best estimate, there's 10% of the Canadian population has a conviction on their criminal record. So that's like over 3 million, well over 3 million people. They're working every day. You just pass someone on your way to work that has a criminal record that's going to their job. You know, so a lot of the time, yes, these people are getting put towards labor, or when an employer sees someone with a record versus someone without a record, a lot of the time, yeah, they are going to go to the individual without the record to hire them. But an employer usually does a background check at the point of hiring. You know, I know people say like, oh, I can't get a job because I have a record, but it's like, but you handed in your resume and didn't get a call back. That's not because of your record, that's because of the resume. So like troubleshooting, at what point are you getting turned down? If you're not getting the job after the interview, It's not because of your record, it's because the interview didn't go so well. So now we've got to work on those interview skills. But if you had a good resume, did great on the interview, and then they did the background check and you didn't get the job, and that's where you're getting stuck, then absolutely that's the record now. A lot of the time that job field, though, is shrunken down by that point. You know, if an employer is still talking to you after an interview, they're interested. So like that's the key to remember is if an employer is talking to you, they're interested, and until the point that a background check is done, we can't be sure that it's because
let me
of
share
the
this.
record.
Can I share this? I have a guy that worked for BMW.
Yeah.
He has a criminal background check. They promote him to a supervisor, and when that criminal background check came, he was fired. You know, and this is a real case, a real situation. So what happened is now his whole thought process of this employment, legal working is just shut down because this is a barrier. So yes, at the end of the day, we have to train them. So we're not taking that away from the equation.
Yeah.
Train everybody, right?
Yeah.
But the reality is, this is a blockage. We have to now change our strategic method of how we're reaching out to people, because this is going to be every day. We could sit here, talk we could come once a month, and it's just the same. We're not going to see a drastic change. It's just going to be the same. How many people, we could do a survey, raise hands, how many people with records got jobs, 1 or 2? Out of the 50 or the hundreds. You understand what I'm saying? So what I'm saying, we have to now try a different way of getting employment. So what I'm saying is more to make build a relationship with corporations, organizations that says, we have a problem with crime in the city, and we want to reduce crime. We want to give people an opportunity. So we're asking them to specifically give a person with a record an opportunity. And if we sit down with these organizations and have that conversation, now we can structurally come up with a plan, and they say, okay, we're going to try 5 a year or whatever. And once they all go through the employment council and job development and get the proper skills, and they give them that chance, and they see that they're successful, they'll be open to hire more people. But outside of that, we could do this. I'm not knocking it, but I'm just saying we've been doing this for years. I don't know if this is a new conversation. I think it's the same thing going on and on and on. So we have to dig a little deeper and try to navigate a little bit different so that we can come up with better results. Because I'm not saying we will get results, but we're talking about better, more consistent. You understand what I'm saying? Because now if all these job markets are hiring people and you guys are training them and they're really successful, they're going to be willing now to change their whole perspective on people with criminal records and not be deterred by that. Yeah. Does that make sense?
No, I absolutely agree with that. I absolutely agree with there does need to be relationships with employers as well. Like there needs to be multiple approaches, and bringing employers into the conversation absolutely has to be a part of it. There's a question here first.
Hi, I agree with what Eddie is saying, that we do need to change how employers see criminal records. My cousin is in the States, and that's all he does. He's a director of an organization, and he have companies that are hiring people who have assault of the deadly weapon and are working in a company with teenagers. And I was shocked because they're realizing that there are great employees with people, they made a mistake, they did their time, and now they're ready. And you're right, there are people who do in here who got jobs with criminal record on their own. But one thing to be aware of is sometimes they hate their job. A lot of times they're being treated like crap, but they have no choice, and they believe that, right? Because they're trying to have an honest living, but they're being treated like crap, they're going home depressed, and eventually they will quit. And then what? Then they're going to commit a crime. So people are getting jobs, but what other jobs are they getting? Right? I'm sure there's a few getting great jobs, but we do, at the end of the day, have to get employers to really see people with criminal records differently. That they have great skills. It's untapped talent there. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
I'm a realist, and I heard this gentleman, and I really believe what he says. But I think until we can change the mindset of employers, which it's not going to happen overnight, there is not a one formula that will work for everybody. We have the East and the West, and having worked with youth before, we talk about the mentality of the West West End, different from the mentality of the East End. What will work with employers in the West End of the city is not going to work with employers in the East End of the city. So it's knowing your clients, knowing those young persons that you're working with. For example, we gave some great ideas already in terms of not putting the address on. Sometimes you can do that because you know your client, sometimes you will not. Not adding the dates. For example, many of them are not very eloquent and will not do an interview very well. You know for that person, you must put the date. It's a combination, it's lots of pieces, and always coming to workshops like this, learning new things. For example, today I've learned, if I'm working with a client and I know they're not very eloquent, I don't need to put the date. But I am putting that person at the risk of answering more questions at an interview. So knowing different things and putting pieces together based on individuals, that is what is going to work. There's no one answer, there's no one shoe size, there's no one size of a glove that's going to work for the situation. We want to solve it. And I feel what he's saying. This thing is like every workshop we go through, we beat this horse until we can't beat it anymore. We're trying to change a system that is not ready to change, but we can only do it in small steps, and until then, we have to find ways to get at least 3 of them in out of 10 in a job than to not get any of them at all, and to not, because we are feeling hopeless, we can also pass that on to them as, okay, there's no hope. We have to be hopeful enough, even while we know that we can't break the system yet, be hopeful enough and work with the tools that we have to get at least 3 of them in.
Thank you. Yeah, there's a couple of comments on the side.
I really appreciate what's being said here, and I wonder then, just in terms of, I guess, one thing is, you know, youth with criminal records, it intersects with the social determinants of health, right? So you're gonna have race, class, gender, whatever, poverty, social circumstances in life, all of that. So I guess my thing is, most hiring managers are not necessarily aware of that, right? So because HR is mainly looking at, is this person eligible or not, right? Based on policies and procedures that is being laid out. So I wonder then, in line with what Tom was saying, so in addition to writing down, I suppose, or creating a toolkit or booklet for what employers would want to see, I wonder if we could create one for what employers should see or can see, the possibilities that youth have to offer with the criminal record. So looking at who are the youth we're talking about, who are mostly at risk, but changing that term to looking at what benefit can they offer to you despite having a record. I just find that most HR are kind of corporate focused, looking at, we need to bring in the dollar sign, we need to ensure certain people are employed, this is how the show will run. But looking at how the youth or the adults that we bring in, irrespective of criminal records, have the value, are able to run the show for you consistently.
And that, I absolutely agree with basically everything that's being said. Absolutely. Sort of within the scope of this workshop, it's more a focus on working with the individuals as opposed to the outreach with the organizations. But we also, like we've been talking about though, we also need to remember that companies are concerned about liability. They're concerned about their bottom line above all else. That conversation with an employer always ends up having to be, like, it always needs to come back to money when you talk to employers. I wish it didn't, but we always need to find a way, how is this going to benefit the company needs to always be what we're thinking about. Unfortunately, yeah, people do get stuck in jobs that they don't like a lot of the time, not even just exclusive to people with criminal records, but a lot of the time people with criminal records. And again, it's just trying to figure out with the people that we're working with, the people that we have those direct connections to, is helping to figure out how can you change that? Like, what can you do to sort of move on from that situation? Right? And so that's the hard part, is that there's definitely the bigger changes that we would like to make, but that's kind of going on behind the scenes. And at the same time, we can't just tell the people we're working with, oh, it's okay, we're talking to those people. Like, we can let them know that things are being done, but we also need to be able to give them options right now.
Yeah.
this is a kind of job that you can get for now. This is how you can get the credentials to do a different kind of job. And then being realistic with what jobs people are able to do. But there is, it's not just construction. Like, it's not just construction. And trades are good. Like, trades are absolutely great. When people want to do, a lot of the time when people think construction, they think like the small company they worked for $15 an hour cash. But it's like, then why don't we point them towards a trade, getting into a union, getting an apprenticeship, letting them know, in 4 or 5 years, you're going to be making $40 an hour. Trades, hospitality is possible with a record. There's people, social services is one of the big ones that we get. When people want to do this type of work, and with a record, it's more doable than some other industries. But also with larger corporations, larger companies, it's not currently a reality to direct people towards those kind of jobs a lot of the time, just simply based on company policy. Yes?
Can I ask him a question?
Yeah.
So you said people are supposed to create programs, right, to help people like coming out of jail. So my question to you was, say, for example, Jimmy went to jail with Gary, right? And they both end up being good kids, one day, and they both get accepted into this program, but they're not supposed to be with each other. Like, they're not supposed to be around each other within 12 meters or so, right? But my question is, I doubt there'll be more than 4 or 5 programs, right? Because the government doesn't really care, like, to me, about people that have been in jail. Like, that's how I see it. So how exactly would it work? Because I know East and West have problems with each other too. So if there's like 4 or 3 programs and you're putting kids from East and West in one program, and Jim and Gary in another program separating from each other, isn't that going to create more problem, and then they're going to breach? But how do you know that?
Yeah, but that's limited.
They're not scholars. These are very basic-minded young people, right? They don't. When it comes to like certain jobs, I'm sorry, I didn't even mean to come into this situation. But we have young people that, for one, like if it's construction, some of my guys, I'm like, just take the construction job. I don't want to do construction. That's not me. I'm not for that. So they're not even going to. They don't want to step into an arena that they're not confident in. So a lot of times we'll get a guy. You could probably get a guy with a criminal record in construction, and you say, hold it down for a year. That's your perspective. Hold it down for a year, but that person does not feel confident. They're not going to be successful in that. And a lot of time they work. That's why the resumes are so short, like 2 months here, because they tried it. It's not for them. We gotta enhance their skill, their ability. Now, when you have a person, there's plenty of clients that I deal with, and Johnny can't be with Michael, and they're with each other. So it's not, and they're with each other. Like, I have 2 people that are not supposed to be with each other right now, and I'm pleading in the courts on the behalf of them, saying they're in training, so please allow them. You understand what I'm saying? And they're working with me on that. So a lot of times when they're separates, it's not even based on like they hate each other. It's based off the crime. They were co-accused and stuff like that. So they're different things. But it's not. This is a suggestion. I don't say I have the answers, but we can follow patterns of what works. They have a place in California, Los Angeles, where they only hire criminals. It's specific. They flip burgers, and they just in that restaurant. We could advocate on a greater level. Don't stop. Don't abandon what you're doing now. Do what you're doing. You understand what I'm saying? We're not saying change. Hey, stop what you're doing. Continue to do what you're doing and get those guys, those little 1 or 2 jobs. Get them in there. But what I'm saying is a bigger picture that we need to start paying attention to, right? Work with organizations that are willing to now, because we're trying to change the community on a whole. You understand? So if we set up these things and follow patterns of things that have worked in other places, that it was successful. This is successful in actually Los Angeles, and a few of those guys that came out with that work in this, you could Google it, are actually actors now, because now they have movies about gangs, and they go to these same people with criminal records, and now they're in a movie and they're successful. So what I'm saying is that we have to think bigger and try to make relationships over here, over there. So this is a big city. You understand what I'm saying? And so we could always look. I mean, we look at the concerns of conflict or whatever. But you according to records and according to court papers, we separate people. And there's a lot of people that doesn't travel to this side of town because they know they have problems with people. So that won't even be an issue. You know what I'm saying? So like I said, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I don't want to take away.
It's all good.
But we could talk on
I think we're just about at break, I think.
Sorry, I'm just going to quickly jump in.
Yeah.
We are a little bit past break, so
Yeah.
I really love the energy and questions in the room. I don't want to cut it short, but I do want to give people maybe at least a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
Before I do that, I want to give a little shout out to the Employment Connections table. Were you going to speak about that? Awesome. So maybe I can pass it over to you. But there is a table, there's an east table and a west table, and the whole purpose is to try to engage employers around hiring youth with criminal records. And there's an annual job fair that is all employers that know the applicants or the participants will have criminal records, and they're all willing to hire. It's not an issue. Many of them, and some of them, are businesses that were started by people who have criminal records themselves.
Every year, so I'm sorry to say that, but my guys never got a job once. So
Job fair?
There's a problem. But we could talk.
Sure, we could talk. Always a work in progress and always room for progress, but at least there is some efforts around employer engagement. And did you want to add anything
Yeah,
about
if I can very quickly, I know I'm keeping people from break. The Employment Connections, and I see Deandra is here as well. So there is that job fair, but I think the work of the network is actually where a lot of that value comes in, because you're bringing together Employment Ontario agencies. You're also bringing in educational institutions like Humber, for example, and the City of Toronto, and also the ministry. We're also working with ministry officials too. So it's really nice. Like, I think right now we're all talking about structural change, and I don't think anybody's here doesn't believe in structural change, doesn't want to see structural change. But I think it's important to know that those bodies exist where people are trying to leverage. I think we all individually are working with employers around the specific group to get them meaningful work, not just, flipping burgers, but meaningful opportunities for growth too. So I think knowing that those tables exist and maybe trying to build upon those connections is where we want to go. And because I am the only educational institution here, I just wanted to talk about the importance of training and education as part of that social transformation. So in your toolkits, there are, as you flip through it, you're going to see that there are opportunities for academic upgrading, for that skills upgrading, opportunities. There's amazing transition and access programs that don't discriminate based on a criminal record, that will allow your clients to build up the skills that they need and get the training that they need. And so one of the good things I'm going to just flag for everybody are pre-apprenticeships. So the call for pre-apprenticeships came out earlier this year. Most of them are full, but every year, keep your eye out on those pre-apprenticeships. It's so hard for an adult or an older youth to get into a pre-apprenticeship if they've missed out on OYAP, because they might not have finished high school. They might have, missing a lot of credits. But pre-apprenticeships are a great way to get your level 1. They're free, sometimes they're paid. And then some of the pre-apprenticeships will actually hook up that youth or that client with an employer so they can continue on. So look out for pre-apprenticeships, look at academic upgrading. Every single institution has some sort of access program, so the Council of Educators Toronto is a great resource for all of you. It pulls together all of the access programs. Humber trustees that network. So if you have questions about education and training, I will be here, and I just want to, I think education is part of this answer when we talk about social transformation too.
And one of our frontline worker workshops coming up in the fall is an educational attainment workshop. So we'll be hearing more about these kind of opportunities as well if you'll be attending that workshop. So shall we do a 5-minute break and then try to come back to at least do the case study activity quickly before we wrap? Okay, thank you. So 5 minutes if we can, come back at 11:10 and give us 20 minutes for our activity. 11:10? Thank you.
We've connected with the guy before. Yes. I gotta run to the bathroom. All right, can you hang back at the end and we can talk for a minute? All right.
We also got to do a retreat where we went in for 2 days and they like interact with us and how they fit in society that very experience. And you kind of like build it. Right now, we are at drama.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah. So they also do tech and
So I'm
How's it going? Not bad. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, there's lots of good information. No, I'm
I
just.
feel like that's like a lot going on in here.
It's a complicated
It is.
issue for us as a sector.
What do you mean? Like as
Just
an
in terms of the
employment
different.
sector?
Yeah, it's like a nonprofit.
It's on it?
Yeah, like employment. I mean, yeah. Even within our organization, we
Yeah.
have different angles of
Yeah, I know.
for Cat Management, right? So, I found another Indian place.
Oh, yeah?
I've actually been there before. My first date with Sharon was there.
Really?
It's Little India, just at Queen and Spadina.
Okay, cool.
So it's a lot. It's Queen and it's Queen and University.
Oh,
But
okay,
Little
that's
India.
close.
Yeah, it's super
Nice.
close. So,
Cool.
so we're still
Sounds
there.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not my area, but maybe she can try like.
Hey, how's it going?
Get my mind settled until I'm done.
Awesome. Here, let me grab mine for you. What programs does George Brown run right now? Yeah, I'm sorry, Hunger. Yeah. Okay. For sure. Within those three kind of industries that we focus on, construction, hospitality, manufacturing, what programs do you have? Like, okay, yeah.
So I'm with the So we're dealing with young people 15 to 30 in conflict with the law. Okay. So essentially, it's training them. I don't know, you saw me
Yeah, I love it.
Nice. No problem. So it's all one-on-one.
I love it.
A lot of our guys are not getting group settings. They have a few issues that they don't want to see. They don't want to go. Resume work continues skills. Everything in the world in one counselor does, we just want to.
No, this is really great. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
It's really nice it's called a warm referral.
Yeah, you're here.
Everyone's different, you know?
Hello, everybody. Hi.
Oh, you got it, man.
Yeah. What's that network? It's a network.
So you want to
to do that, and yeah, I'll send you along some materials.
Awesome. If the employer can't come, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, but the thing is, I know it's far. It's like it's far. I work for because like, no, the thing is, the people who were there, we did have a initially downtown, so we did some work downtown. How much
I don't know. I'm like, I don't know. At least you can maybe like run through the case study, but I'm like, can you come back and you bring it back to the
We got training. So there's like skills.
Taking off?
No.
Oh, okay. How long does this go?
11:30. What are you guys doing after?
We're actually doing a team lunch. Yeah. You know, we might turn into a little bit of a team meeting. Sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, no. For sure. If I'd known you were here, I would have structured it potentially. It's not going to be an official team meeting, but there will be a few. I'm hoping to touch on a few things in the call of this that are specific to the team. I know that, we'll be done around 1 and then I have a meeting with Agri. But I don't know what Cassandra and I Yeah, I'm not really sure what the agenda is. Yeah, sorry, Nana. Like I haven't even really talked to the team about what they want to discuss. So, yeah.
I just think it'd be a nice way to engage.
It would be. Yeah. Good. Yeah. I'm doing well. It's life is crazy.
Okay, so due to time constraints, we're not able to get to the case studies that everybody has in front of them because we are set to end at 11:30, and that is going to take quite a while to get through all those. If you want to, you can bring them with you and go over them within your teams or your agencies if you're interested. So for now, we're just going to open it up for questions. Any questions, comments for the last 10 minutes? And if you would please complete your evaluation surveys that are off to the side there, and if you can either give it to Laura at the back or leave it where you're sitting, that would be very much appreciated. Yes.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm just curious, with all the agencies that are here, I'm curious of how many seem to work within an anti-oppression, anti-racist framework, because some of the suggestions that have been made here, I think would fit in under that arm or that umbrella, and I think it would definitely inform, practices going forward. I'm curious to know if the organizations that are here, because I'm from the West, and some of the challenges that we were having, and I'm sure it's not just in the West, I'm positive, but some of the challenges that we were having is that agencies who represent, who are there to work with a particular youth population, let me just say it. They say that they're there to work with a lot of black youth and youth of color, but then the organization themselves is not of color at all, and so they end up existing just to gather some funds to be able to continue to work run the organization, but don't necessarily serve the young people that they say they serve. So I'm just curious, with the organizations that are here, what kind of work your organization is actually doing towards any kind of anti-racist, anti-oppression lenses, I hope that made sense. Does that make sense? Yeah, made sense? Okay, very good. Thank you. That question is open to everybody in here, yes.
So the 519 have been working with TCBN, Toronto Community Benefit Network. So what we have been trying to do is to increase diversity in the construction trades, because trades are good jobs. Although there are a lot of misunderstanding and people, not everyone is up for trades, but it's complicated in a way that we reach out to employers and supervisors to have training and education workshop to hopefully that they will be more knowledgeable to the issues their employees are facing. And then I know Metrolinx, because they have to do social and local hiring, they actually establish a very well mechanism for people to report any incident back to them, and then they will go with the union and address the issue with the supervisor. So we have training work, TCBN has training workshop, and then they establish a mechanism for report any incident, and then we also provide additional support for the workers. For example, TCBN has a narrative group, so basically just telling your story, sharing that these are the issues you're facing in the workplace, at least they won't feel lonely in that sense. So it comes in many different ways. Yes, that's what I know.
Wait. Okay. So basically, what you just described is the C program, which I do not run.
Fantastic.
For everyone who came up and asked me about it, I do not run it. I'm just in it. So basically, the program I did was the social work program, which is the pilot project. We were the first ones to do it. We got 3 months of training in-house, which included getting a bunch of certificates such as first aid, motivational interviewing, CPR, addictions in youth, mental health, conflict resolution. Yeah, we did that for 12 weeks, and then we were all set up with a co-op. We are now working with Toronto Community Housing. My friend over here is working with YSM, which they have a lot of pamphlets. Y'all should read that. That's good too. Yeah. So. And it also started off with a retreat where we all got together and got to talk about what it means to be Black, what it means to grow up in certain places that Black people grow up in, and how to deal with that, and how to use those traits to work inside of employments where we're usually not seen, because in social work, especially a lot of Black people, youth are very, they need help, but they come and they see faces that don't look like them. They come and they see people that have experiences that have nothing to do with them, and therefore they're reluctant to seek help. They're reluctant to even think of the word therapy or social work or any shit like that. So, sorry, any things like that. So therefore, it's very, very, very important that people like us stand up and are put in those spaces, because as we know, a part of systemic racism is that having more Black faces in prison and less Black faces in professionalism. So that is what C is doing. They also have a kitchen program which starts mid-June if anyone knows anyone who wants to be in the culinary business. They also do a tech program, which I think starts in a couple months. So go on the website, because again, I do not run it. That is a GAPI. It's www.cceetoronto.com. I think I gave you the card. Is it com? Yeah, .com. So C as in crystal. No, yeah, CEE. E as in egg, E as in egg. Toronto. You live here, you should know how to spell that. .com. Yeah, 2 E's, 2 E's. 1 C. So crystal, egg. Toronto. Not Toronto. Toronto. .com. Toronto. Done.
Yes.
So I won't take up too much time. Your question is actually a really big one, and I don't know that we'll have enough time to go around to everyone. So maybe there's a way that the people attending can maybe share what their organizations are doing and maybe roll that up for the attendees. It's just a suggestion. But in terms of Humber College, I'm representing our Community Outreach and Workforce Development Department. We have a very clear mandate that's grounded in equity, which is we want to provide pathways, access pathways to the workforce, to training or to education, whatever is best for people, and for those who are outside of traditional pathways. And so that means the clients that we're working with today. So I'm just going to encourage you, don't disregard your educational institutions. Many of them have access programs. Some of them, like Humber, has a whole access department like ours. And so we're doing a range of things, even outside of our department around anti-oppression, even just our own internal equity task force. But in terms of like doing sectoral training, skills development, anything like that, we have over 800 community partners who work with industry. So we do take an approach where we bring in the industry partners, we work with community partners, and we have education training as sort of like a part of that model and how we approach this work. So I'll just, again, check out your local institutions, look at the Council of Educators Toronto, and I'm more than happy to speak with anybody if you're interested in learning more about what we do. We are in a skills gap right now, and I was at break talking to somebody about this, but if we really want to help our clients stand above and beyond somebody else, we really need to be having them think about, okay, what are the skills that I need? How do I get there? Because Canada's in a skills gap, and it's only going to get worse. So we want to actually be talking with our clients about things like automation and the jobs of the future, so that they can, break into the workforce and then move up. So that's all I have.
Thank you so much. And I do wish we had more time to hear from everybody. The suggestion of being able to share, if you would like, work that you're doing within your organizations around confronting anti-Black racism and anti-oppression, feel free to connect with me. We will be running a workshop this year or early next year that we're currently developing with our Confronting Anti-Black Racism unit here at the City of Toronto, where hopefully we can get into some of this work more in depth with the focus of the workshop. So stay tuned, and if there's anything else anyone wanted to add at this point, feel free, or other questions, but we do unfortunately only have like a minute left. I think maybe some of the feedback could be that we do need longer for this workshop. We're struggling with recognizing you all are busy and you can't necessarily dedicate a whole day to a training, but then we also run into this problem of never having enough time, and the discussion and networking is so important as well. So give us your feedback about what would work for you for these types of trainings. We're still trying to fine-tune the series to work for everybody. Thanks.
So cute.
I think so.
Well done. Thank you, Alan.
Sorry?
They should restructure it so
Yeah.
that they spend their money on a light lunch after, because people
Yeah.
want to network after the
Exactly. Now
conversation,
everybody's
not before,
really,
right?
yeah.
And people eat breakfast anyways. They
And
can pick
then-
it up at Tim Hortons
Yeah,
on the way, right?
and then also they leave after, right? Yeah.
I think I might suggest that. And then they leave and they go get lunch anyways, right? So
Yeah,
if you,
all the time.
I know they probably can't afford to cater a whole lunch. But
Yeah. That's a good thing. Where do we put this thing?
Probably just give it, come around and get it, I'm guessing. Oh, the evaluation, yeah.
We didn't clap for Alan. Can we clap for Alan? Like, thank you, Alan. Thank you.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, so we'll definitely be in touch. All right, then because you're working with me, right? Yeah. So yeah, so I gotta talk to all. Yeah, man, we'll definitely. All right. Pleasure to meet you.
This same conversation, lawyers, counselors, and we all have like a talk. So like,
Yeah, I'm jealous. Yeah. Yeah, we do a lot of like a pipeline around junkies. That's trying to be able to in junks? No, I think she might be cool. But yeah. Any contact? Yeah. Be in contact and whatever we go, there's something coming up. I know, yeah, how you doing?
Oh, no worries, bro. Nice to see you. Man. Take care. I wish I was looking to Oh my god. I miss that man, like, genuinely. How you doing though? Yeah, I love the haircut, man. You look great. You look healthy, man. Honestly. You kind of fell out. I mean, he was in the West. I was in the East. We didn't really have that. Take care.
Bye. See you.
So.
Hey, and I wouldn't expect anything less. Like, that's totally acceptable. Awesome. Oh, that's funny.
Some extra copies.
Good. Okay, I'm gonna go take a look at this.
Okay, do you wanna?
Love the stop. Come on, man.
Yeah, it's like a small meeting. It's not. It's an internal thing, though. It's not. I'm just saying we're all gonna be there. How's it going? Are you with the nonprofit stuff? Oh, Sammy, yeah. Oh, you Starbucks? Hold on, I got. Yeah, it's the best way to do it in this business. Yeah, absolutely. I'm mobile. Yeah, it's one-on-one employment counseling, conflict with the law. I'm like the whole Scarborough pretty much. Preferably like north of like, let's say St. Clair or something, because then it gets a little, it's downtown pretty much. But they can still be referred to me. I might get them in a program like closer to where they live downtown, but I'll still provide the support system. Yeah. Oh, okay. I got you. Allergic to me or?
No, Des.
Oh, okay.
Des.
I got you.
There might
I think
be
I
Des.
might have, hold on.
No, good.
I might have like a,
That's it.
okay. Well then if I can't offer you a tissue, let me offer you a flyer.
You're good. You're good.
Hold on.
Thank you.
Hold on.
I have a bunch of tissues.
I got a flyer for you though.
Oh, you do? Okay.
This one's actually got my card attached to it if you want to like put it in your office or something. So it's changing transplant, it's something like that. Yeah, and your name was Chantel, yeah. Awesome. No, I love connecting. Yeah, I mean you're the people on the ground, so no, it's good. Just shoot me an email, give me a call or something, so I know it's you and we're connected, and go from there. All right. Okay. Nice to meet you, Chantel. Okay.
That's for a long time now.
Because it's interesting to talk about this because
for sure.
But I don't know once we're all on top. I just want to make sure that we don't like. I just want to make sure I don't take it. But there was also a pile. Were you taking a few extra? Oh, sure. Okay.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Please.
I get home.
Oh my God.
I'm headed out of cell phone. Can you tell? I'm having a wonderful time. No cell phone.
Exactly. Yeah.
Things don't change.
You have in your pocket. I got a hand on my. Yeah, exactly.